Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast. The little things, big problems, how to handle micro-stress in relationship episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who want to stop suffering in relationship and who want a deeper sense of love and connection. I coach them how to do it and how to be the best version of themselves and live the life they love. So, micro-stress refers to the buildup of the little things or the stressors that people do that seem like no big deal, yet over time can cause a lot of stress on the relationship. Unlike being passive-aggressive, micro-stressors are usually not intentional and aren't meant to hurt the other person. It's just the little things that they do, and those little things can drive you nuts, like when they leave their clothes all over the place or letting their dishes pile up in the sink. Sometimes it's changing plans without telling you. Or maybe it's the small corrections or little criticisms over really minor things or insignificant incidents or issues. Well, let me tell you Dino's story and what micro-stressors did to his marriage. Dino and his wife Diane, not their real names, had been married for close to 3 years. And from the outside, their relationship seemed pretty strong. And for the most part, it was. Yet their micro-stressors started to take its toll on their marriage. For Dino, it was how he had an annoying habit of leaving his sneakers all over the house. He had like a dozen pairs of sneakers, and he would just leave them where he took them off. A lot of times, Diane would trip over his sneakers when he wasn't around, and she would end up picking them up and putting them away. It wasn't a huge deal, but when it started happening more often, Diane began to get frustrated and agitated. Another example was when Dino would forget to tell Diane if his work schedule changed, coming home late without telling her, or he would make last-minute plans with friends without telling her. And this caused Diane to feel some kind of way. It was like she didn't matter. Now, mind you, Dino wasn't doing this on purpose. It's just what he did. That unconscious pattern thing. Well, the same was true for Diane. She had this habit of constantly reminding Dino about chores over and over again. And she didn't mean to nag, but that's how Dino took it. He felt like she didn't trust him to remember on his own. Another thing that annoyed the shit out of Dino was when Diane would nitpick about the smallest mistakes Dino would make, like not loading the dishwasher right, or missing a spot when he would wipe down the kitchen counter. And the way Dino took it, he felt like he couldn't do anything right in her eyes. So this kind of little stuff would go on. It was Dino who noticed Diane's behavior and was getting more and more annoyed. The thing was, he failed to see that his own behaviors were frustrating Diane and adding to the tension in the relationship. And you can imagine how over time these seemingly small stressors led to a lot of arguments and ultimately both feeling more and more disconnected. Well, one day Dino came to me after being referred to me for some mind-body support by one of the therapists at the health clinic where I work. All Dino would talk about was his frustration with Diane. At first, I listened and supported him in his frustration. He felt so supported that he asked if he could bring his wife in, and I agreed. When the three of us met, and hearing some of Diane's side of the story, I was able to see that Diane's behavior seemed more aligned with micro-stressors than being passive-aggressive. After pointing out what micro-stressors were, Diane shared her frustrations about Dino's behavior and asked if I thought it was micro-stressors. Well, it sure sounded like it to me, because I knew Dino was oblivious to what he was doing, right? That's when I asked Dino what he thought. And he paused and said that he hadn't really thought about it that way, and yet he got it, that he was indeed guilty of micro-stressors. Well, when all this came to light, we were able to get down to business. The first thing was them taking responsibility for each of their parts in the dynamic. Dino opened up and apologized to Diane, saying that he didn't realize that what he was doing affected her the way it did. He also apologized for behaving in a way that had her feeling like he didn't care or that he didn't appreciate her. And Diane, in turn, apologized, saying that she didn't mean to nag or seem critical. She recognized how her actions had Dino feeling like he couldn't do anything right. Well, the next step was to work on keeping the micro-stressors from negatively impacting their relationship. And we started with communication. They agreed to take time once a week to talk about plans for the week to make sure they were both on the same page with each other's schedules. And if anything changed, they would let each other know right away. We also worked on the two of them being more self-aware, having them to be present to how their own behavior might impact the other before saying something that might come out sideways. I gave them appreciation homework, before going to bed each night, to offer at least 3 appreciations to acknowledge each other's efforts and strengths. All the good stuff, right? Another thing we did to keep Diane from seeming like she was nagging was to share a to-do list and calendar. And it served as more of a gentle reminder, and it allowed Dino to take responsibility in doing his tasks, his part, without Diane having to remind him all the time. And of course, I had to remind them that change is a process and that it was likely they would slip into their old habits, their old micro-stressors, and to have patience and grace with each other as they worked on making the changes. And it was through lots of practice and grace that Dino and Diane were able to turn their marriage around into a more supportive, understanding, and loving one. They learned that by being aware and addressing these micro-stressors early on could keep the little things from being big problems for the long-term health and satisfaction of their relationship. So, does any of this sound familiar in your relationship? These little micro-stressors that can sneak up on you and over time cause problems? Well, you're not alone if you do. It's pretty common, actually. And I think the key here is awareness and communication. If you notice it going on, whether it's from your spouse or partner or from yourself, talk about it and get help if you need it. And I want to say, there can be a lot of underlying factors that can contribute to micro-stressors. And again, most of this is unintentional behavior, not on purpose. It's that subconscious thing. It's just how it plays out. So some of the factors include, and the big one is poor communication. That was the part of the problem with Dino and Diane, is that they didn't talk about it until they got help. And thank God they did. Avoiding talking about it and not addressing issues directly can lead to those little annoyances piling up and becoming big problems. Issues from past arguments that haven't been resolved can also lead to micro-stressors, especially when the unresolved arguments get triggered. And sometimes it comes down to personality traits and habits. Say if one of you has a perfectionist personality, for example, their high standards can cause micro-stress by constantly having to correct or be critical of the other person. And sometimes that can be their own feelings about themselves being projected onto the other person. And talking about habits, repeated bad habits like leaving a mess, being late or changing plans at the last minute, all that stuff can build up stress over time. Other factors can include stress from work and life and not having enough downtime for yourselves. This may cause either or both of you to be more sensitive or less patient, so more irritable or agitated, frustrated, that kind of thing. Another thing is if either of you aren't getting your emotional needs met, or there are some insecurities in the relationship, Both of those things can lead to becoming more sensitive to the small stressors. If you're not feeling seen or heard, or if you feel unsupported or even unloved, all that can cause you to be irritated pretty easily, right? And there are more factors to think about, like traditional gender roles, the societal expectation and norms. There are life changes and transitions that can happen. All that can impact microstress in a relationship. And there are a variety of ways to address microstress in relationship, like I shared with Dino and Diane. I always start with open communication. Talk about your feelings, what you need, and what your concerns are openly. And do it on the regular to help avoid misunderstandings so you can create an environment of support. And then you can work on conflict resolution. Make sure you deal with your conflicts directly and clear up any unresolved issues rather than letting them silently build up and cause more problems. Like I said with Dino and Diane, show appreciation for each other. Appreciating each other's good stuff, their strengths and their efforts. That can offset some of the little annoying things. Make sure you manage your stress. Man, I can't stress this enough, no pun intended. That's both individually and jointly. Work together to manage your stress. Come up with solutions, collaborate, rather than letting the stress get the best of you. It's so important. You can do it. And continue to work on self-awareness and your personal growth. Both of you, individually and together. This will help to create more trust and help to build emotional security and helping to get your emotional needs met. And that's so important in relationship. So navigating microstress in your relationship can be tricky. And by doing the things I mentioned and being aware and addressing the underlying factors, you can minimize the impact microstress has on your relationship and create a more healthy and more resilient relationship. Do the work. It's worth it for the long term of your relationship. I discovered a rather long quote from American author Gretchen Rubin. She says, quote, "In the end, it's not the huge things in life that make us or break us. It's the small stuff. The little annoyances and irritations that add up over time and cause stress and tension." Then she goes on to say, "What you do every day matters more what you do once in a while. It's not the big things that add up in the end. It's the hundreds, thousands, or millions of little things that separate the ordinary from the extraordinary." Unquote. So you can go both ways, right? The little stuff does matter. Thank you, Gretchen. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast. The Little Things, Big Problems. How to Handle Microstress in Relationship episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. Thanks for listening. Coming up on the next episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, it's a bonus episode with a guy I've had on the show before, Dr. Simon Focht. He is a scholar, educator, philosopher, and writer, a really deep thinker. He shares his thoughts and experience with polyamory relationships and ethical non-monogamy. If you're the least bit curious about what poly and ethical non-monogamy is all about, you won't want to miss it. Please join me next time for the Polyamory and Ethical Non-Monogamy in Relationship with Dr. Simon Focht episode. That's a mouthful. Now remember, if you have any ideas for the show, please let me know. You can reach me through my website, menonthepathtolove.com. And while you're there, you can schedule a free coaching session on how to communicate better in your relationship. You can also download my free cheat sheet, 5 ways to communicate better in relationship. It's all at menonthepathtolove.com. And as always, I encourage you to spread the word about the Men on the Path to Love podcast. Feel free to post it on your social media. Tell the world. I'm trying to make the world a better place, y'all, with more love and connection. So please, share the link and share the love. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.